So Becky, why is horror interest on the rise in the U.S.?
Well, there's a couple reasons why it's on the rise. The first is the most obvious, and this was originally noted by Stephen King in his book Danse Macabre, which came out in the 1980s, where he noted the social influence of horror readership. When times are tough, people turn to horror. And to say that times have been tough for the last few years is an understatement, I know, but we have so much strife and uncertainty and global pandemics and terrible political situations. People do one of two things. Either they go and they read something that's gentle to give them a chance to have a little bit of a relief, or they go to something even worse. And this has been seen over time. And horror especially is getting popular for that reason. People want to read about something that's worse than what they're dealing with day to day. You are having trouble paying the bills, you're sick, you don't have health insurance. If you read about a vampire stalking people, that's worse than what's happening to you. Not having to stare down a horde of zombies, right? Not dealing with something in the woods that is definitely trying to kill you. It provides that escape, much like all fiction. But again, there's a reason for that when we're feeling really tense and under a lot of stress. But another reason is that'd be enough, right? But now it's blossoming because we have so many writers who are doubling down on, as we like to call it, the H word. It used to be that it was hidden under thrillers, or maybe we'd use a word paranormal or dark fantasy. But when Stephen King proved that you could sell books with horror, then you started to see writers who wanted to look to write horror not have to hide under those other phrases of thriller or dark fantasy or mystery. And so what happened was they started to enter writing workshops and get MFAs, and I hear this from writers all the time. They grew up on Stephen King, but also R.L. Stine. And they went into these writing workshops and they said, I want to write horror, and afraid that someone was going to make them tone it down or call it something else. And they've been encouraged by that generation that came up just behind Stephen King. And so we see this going, and now we have these amazing writers who have been through these programs and worked together, and they're allowed to write horror. And then the third thing we're seeing is, and we're seeing this in a lot of fiction, but it's really happening in horror, is this rise of marginalized people, of women, people of color, queer people. They are ruling horror right now. And why? And I can tell you myself as a woman, as a Jewish woman, because real life horror happens when you're in the margins. And women especially are kicking butt at body horror because we know what puberty's like for a woman, and it is body horror. And if you've had a baby like I have, that's a parasite growing inside of you. But even more so, those who live on the margins, who experience horror in their daily lives, are mining that. And they're mining that for books and stories that use it and turn it on its head with horror tropes. Authors like Victor LaValle are the most famous doing this, Stephen Graham Jones, where they take their personal experience and the horrors of marginalization, but tell authentic, scary stories that everyone can relate to. We also see this in that retellings are very popular. You see it with things like The Little Mermaid, which is not horror. We have a retelling of that. We're using marginalized characters, which is fantastic, but horror's doing it all the time. Fairy tales, traditional stories, horror stories of zombies. Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin, which came out last year in 2022, is a retelling of the zombie novel with trans characters in the center. And it's just wonderful. And they're all great. And they're scary because they hit at a reality of the fear that even the best monster novelists, even Stephen King himself, have to work really hard at.